Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. For those of you who have been following this channel for a while, you might notice from the video's title that this is not the first time we're attempting this challenge. About a year ago, I already attempted beating Persona 5 Royal using only gun type moves, basically only allowing attacks from the gun itself, gun skills, and showtimes where the animation is focused on gun attacks. Unfortunately, that challenge failed during the Kaneshiro boss fight, since Kaneshiro has gun immunity and there wasn't any way to trigger showtimes while he was at full health. A few months after posting the video, I got an interesting comment though saying that if I allow showtimes that are based on guns, there isn't really a reason to ban gun-based items like the stun gun or the air cannon, and that was actually a pretty good point and something I never even considered back when I attempted this for the first time. So basically, here we are once again with attempt number 2 of Can You Beat Persona 5 Royal using only gun type damage. The rules are mostly the same as last time with one exception, so let's quickly go through those again. First of all, only gun type damage is allowed. This includes damage from the actual gun, all skills that are classified as gun attacks, showtime attacks where the main focus is on guns, and now also gun-based items, which are basically the stun gun and the air cannon. Again, please note that this rule won't come into play until after the Alligor boss fight, since you don't really have any opportunity to grind gun skills up to that point. The difficulty we're playing on again is hard, since hard in my opinion is harder than merciless, especially considering we're going to be working a lot with technical hits that do triple the amount of damage on merciless. Skills are allowed as long as they don't deal damage, same goes for items, except the stun gun and the air cannon, which we will allow like just mentioned. Also no repel cheesing, so no use of Miros or Tetrakarn and Makarakarn, no DLC or network fusions, and also as always, no New Game Plus, we start off a fresh file. Last but not least, the goal of this challenge is to beat the game and achieve the true royal ending. And before this intro gets way too long again, I'd say we're gonna get started now. We start the game, select the difficulty, and name our main character. Since Cold Magnum wasn't able to get the job done, we'll see if his successor Cold Magnum Jr. is able to pull off what his father couldn't. Again, there isn't really much to talk about in the beginning of the game. We go through the opening cutscenes, meet Sojiro and also best girl An and Ryuji, and shortly afterwards already off into the first palace. Like mentioned earlier in the rules, at this point we don't really have any way to get access to gun skills or anything yet, so we basically play the game normally until right after the Alligor fight. Once Shio decides to go skydiving without parachute, we return to the castle, An gets kidnapped, and this is basically where the challenge starts. Before rescuing An, there is a room with 3 enemies, and this is the place where we can get our first gun skill. The attacks from the normal guns are not going to be enough to take out Belphegor, so we basically grind here until our Zen hits level 5 and learns Dream Needle. You can easily respawn those enemies by going into the save room, saving, and then reloading the save to make sure you can grind enough experience to get there. Once that is done, we rescue An and easily dispose of Belphegor. The guns themselves already do a pretty good amount of damage, and Joker can finish the enemy off with Dream Needle once everybody runs out of ammo. Before going back into the castle to secure the infiltration route, we stop by the airsoft shop to upgrade our guns. This basically consumes all the money we have gotten so far, but it's going to be real useful in the palace, so it's definitely worth the investment. We also get a tutorial for crafting infiltration tools, and this one is very important since crafting is pretty much the only way to get stun guns and air cannons, and we're going to need quite a few of them at various points in the game. We start the confidant with Beskura Takimi and also get Ryuji to rank 2 before going back into the palace again. We get the fusion tutorial where we have to sacrifice our Ascent to fuse an Agathion, but luckily we can carry over Dream Needle. Generally, gaining new personas in the beginning of the game will be quite a bit of an issue since we won't have a lot of chances to recruit demons due to the lack of knockdowns since we only use gun attacks. There isn't really a lot to say about the majority of random encounters here. Most of them can be beaten in a single turn with the upgraded guns from the party. Everything that is left after turn 1 is usually taken care of with Dream Needle afterwards. Unfortunately, we have to stay away from the strong shadows in here. Those would give a lot of experience, but seeing as it's always going to be a bear riff, which nulls guns, there is no point trying those. Because of that, we skip over to the first mini-boss, Archangel. Archangel always starts the fight by charging and follows it up with a cleave, which is a guaranteed one-shot unless the party member guards the attack. So basically once everybody's out of ammo, all party members defend while Joker throws out Dream Needles. Unfortunately, An gets one shot, even through the guard, but at this point the boss is pretty much almost done. Since we got no revival beads left at the end of the fight, Morgana is not gonna get any experience, but that isn't really a big of an issue. Once we get Joker to level 8, we fuse an Oberian. This one not only resists physical, which is really nice for the upcoming boss fight, but is also the first persona to have access to Snap, which does medium gun damage and is therefore a nice upgrade to Dream Needle. Generally, there aren't that many gun skills that we can work with in this playthrough, so every upgrade is huge, especially this early in the game. We skip ahead to the next mini-boss, where we have to beat 2 Eligor in order to get the ice needed to cross the bridge. Those really aren't a big issue at all. An can put them to sleep with Dormina, so they never even attack, and sleep is also one of the status elements that lets you hit technicals with your gun attacks, so basically a perfect combination to take down those enemies. I also like how you're getting the technical tutorial in the second Eligor fight, when we have been using the combination of Dormina plus technical pretty much throughout the entirety of the palace already. Anyways, at this point we're pretty much done with the mandatory battles, but the party's only around level 9 and I'd still like to have a few more utility skills for the upcoming battle with Kamoshida. The ones we're specifically looking into are Media and Tarunda, both of which are learned on level 11 by Morgana and An. Not only will those skills make the fight much safer, the extra levels also add an additional layer of survivability, which is definitely a nice bonus. Before leaving the palace, we are also collecting the last will seed, which is guarded by slime. This one is resisting guns, so damage output is rather low for the most part, but luckily we can once again work with technicals by putting it to sleep. Once the boss is defeated, we get the Crystal of Lust as a reward. This one gives access to Diorama, which we're going to put on Ryuji, so basically we have a means to heal with every single party member now. And with that, we are basically done with everything we can do in this palace, so it is back into the real world for now. By the way, I love that occasionally other characters are standing in the background waiting for the subway. I literally never noticed that until this very playthrough. Anyways, we stop by the clinic to buy some healing items for emergency cases and decide to drop the calling card on Kamoshida. We craft our first of many stun guns and are back into the palace the following day for the first major boss fight. Once we get our debuffs on Kamoshida and Tarukaja on Joker, he starts doing damage with Snap. We will conserve most of the party members' gun attacks for now, since they aren't really needed at this point yet, so unless we need to heal or apply buffs or debuffs, they are on guarding duty for the most part. With the extra guards, and Joker also resisting physical damage, Kamoshida barely does any damage early on. After a few more turns, we get into the next phase of the fight where we now have to get rid of the trophy to prevent him from healing. Luckily, after putting Rakunda on the trophy, 3 snaps are just enough to destroy it and advance the fight further. We eat the first spike, and Shiyu gets summoned right afterwards. In order to get rid of her, you can either beat her or deal 300 damage to Kamoshida. I decided to go with the latter here, since you can easily knock down Shiyu and then use Baton Pass to deal good amounts of damage to Kamoshida with Snap afterwards. At this point, the game wants you to send one of the party members to steal Kamoshida's crown. I already tried this in my first attempt and failed, and even though I knew it probably wouldn't work this time either, I still gave it a shot for whatever reason. Although we did actually get really close, it still wasn't enough, and Ryuji was detected before we were able to strike the crown down. This is not really a problem though, since at that point Kamoshida only uses Golden Knife anymore, which doesn't really do a whole lot of damage anyways. So we continue on the fight until Joker snapped Kamoshida into oblivion and the fight is won. Back in the real world, we have some free time now, so we use that to make some more stun guns and advance our confidence even further. Ryuji especially is very important here, since we can insta-kill weak enemies once we get him up to rank 7. We also start the confident with Coffee Daddy Sojiro, but we will only get him to rank 2 for now to be able to brew coffee, since his perks aren't that useful compared to others. Another important thing is working on our social stats, especially Guts, since you need Guts at rank 4 in order to start the confident with a Y. Customizing guns with shock or freeze is going to be very important in order to hit technicals more easily, so we want to get there as quickly as somewhat possible. Ranking up Takemi in the clinic is also nice, since it not only increases her item stock, but also gives additional points in guts as well. The majority of the nighttime at this point is spent crafting more stun guns. In order to get additional items out of crafting, as well as extra points in proficiency, we also try to save scum so we can be as efficient as somewhat possible. Continuing on with the story, we try to sell off the medal to Iwai and get a package with a gun that we have to smuggle out in return. This gun is our only means to easily apply shock for now, since we need to get Iwai to rank 3 before being able to customize guns, and that is still going to take a while. Once everything is done, we go out to celebrate our victory and get to name our group. The first one couldn't get the job done. Hopefully, this reloaded version yields better results. During this time, we also start Ann's confident, though we will not get her up very high since she won't see a lot of usage in the later parts of the challenge anymore. As soon as we can leave during nighttime, we get the job at the beef bowl shop in order to work there and also kick off the confident with Yoshida. The party gets their introduction to mementos for the first time, though there isn't much to do at this point yet other than completing the first request and meeting Josei on the way out. We also meet Maruki, who in theory is the only confidant we need to finish in order to get the true royal ending. Even though Akechi is technically not required to get the bonus content, maxing him out does give you a few additional cutscenes, which I kinda count towards the true royal ending as well. And of course, any playthrough of this game is not valid unless you button mash on Morgana. Anyways, we run into Yusuke and Madarame and are basically getting started with Palace number 2 at this point. Before heading there though, we go back to the airsoft shop in order to upgrade our guns again. The first Palace visit isn't really worth mentioning for the most part. The enemies aren't a big issue, even less so with the new guns that we just got. Just like in Kamoshida's castle, again, we can't beat the strong shadow here since it's a Shikiuchi, which once again nulls gun damage. We continue making our way through the palace until we run into the barrier, and that's basically all we can do for now. Since Choka already hit level 15, we've used a Shisa. This one is a decent upgrade to a Barian, but is only going to be a placeholder until we reach level 18 and are able to fuse a Shikiuchi. During evening times, we continue making stun guns and air cannons if we have the materials needed, since we're going to need the first couple of those relatively soon. Yusuke tries to get Ann out of her clothes, doesn't succeed though, and we end up discovering Madarame's secret. In the meantime, Choker and Ryuichi try to get through Nue in the metaverse, and this battle is actually kinda annoying. Skullcracker can put characters into confusion, which not only doesn't let them attack, but they also throw away money and items. Considering Shisa is also weak to Curse, Maya does a load of damage and we actually game over on the first attempt. Second attempt fortunately went much smoother, probably also due to a lucky crit on Snap, and a few more attacks later, Nu is already down. Ann and Yusuke end up in the palace, Yusuke awakens to his persona, and we dive right into the next fight. Strategies are mostly the same here, apply buffs on Choka, debuff the enemy, and go to work. One thing I want to mention here is that in this fight, characters will occasionally be put into rage status, which makes them attack with a normal attack. I decided against resetting here if that happens, because with the amount of enemies, it's pretty much impossible to prevent it from happening, and it didn't really have a lot of impact on the fight anyways, since they don't do a lot of damage. So once we take care of Ippondatara, we clear up the remaining Kappa Tengus, and the fight is already won. We get Ryuichi's Confidant to rank 7 to unlock his insta-kill ability, and are already back into the palace afterwards. The first mini-boss in Vanilla was a Shiki-Uchi, which would have been quite the problem. Luckily in Royal, they changed it to a Kurama Tengu, which is not a big deal at all. Thanks to the ailment gun, we can apply shock to everybody and follow it up with technical hits, which makes this battle a breeze. I actually didn't get hit a single time in the entire battle, so yeah, shock does quite some good work here to say at least. After completing the battle, we also get our first skill card. Those will come in handy at various points of the game, but it's nothing really game breaking for the most part. Grinding experience in this palace is quite a bit of a problem though, especially in the later parts, since there are a lot of encounters with gun immune enemies like Inugami, Makami, or also Shikiuchi. Not only does this make it harder to level up, it also increases our security level since we have to run away every single time. In Royal, you're not gonna get kicked out of the palace at 100% anymore, but this is still something that makes me feel slightly unwell for whatever reason. We skip forward to the second mini-boss of the dungeon, which is also the reason why we tried crafting as many stun guns and air cannons as possible earlier on. This is the first mandatory fight where the enemies have gun immunity, so we have to resort to a different strategy here. In my first attempt last year, I went with insta-kill items here since those technically don't deal damage and therefore don't really violate the rules, but I was never really happy with that solution since it did kind of feel like taking advantage of a gray zone. This time though, we can easily beat them using stun guns since gun items are now allowed as well. Makamis are weak to electricity, so we can get in 3 additional stun guns each turn. Each one of them has 305 HP, so we need a total of 21 items to finish them off, and that's pretty much all there is to that battle. The only thing left at this point is the gatekeeper of the will seed, Arahabaki. Before we tackle this one though, we leveled the party up to level 18 in order to fuse a Shikiuchi. The elemental affinities on it are really nice, and it's also the first persona to learn double shot, which is the next upgrade to our gun skill inventory. With that, we are about to tackle our Habaki, and this one is a huge pain. Not only does it resist gun attacks, but the constant spam of various status elements is a huge problem. I did beat it during my first challenge attempt, and the Crystal of Vanity is a rather nice accessory for the upcoming boss fight against Madarame, so I did want to get it again. There is quite some luck involved with it though. The plan is to perma-lock it into Confusion since that prevents any nasty status elements from the boss. Sleep unfortunately isn't an option here since our Habaki recovers more HP per turn during sleep that we can actually inflict to the enemy. If Confusion misses, or our Habaki gets a turn in before we can reapply it, there is a good chance the party gets wiped, and this actually happened quite a few times. Eventually though, we get an attempt with good enough RNG, including a very lucky double crit double shot right at the end, and are able to take it down and retrieve the last will seed. Missing any will seeds in general isn't really that big of a deal since you can buy them at Jose's shop in Mantus later on, but considering that I want to use this one for the upcoming boss fight, I figured I'd rather get it now. Once that is done, we set the calling card and are off into the second major boss fight. Madarame again comes in 2 different phases. In phase 1, the goal is to take down all the different portrait parts. Ideally you want to take out the right eye and the nose first, since those like to spam elemental attacks, which do actually hurt quite a bit. The parts will regenerate after a while, but luckily only with a very small amount of HP, so we can easily take them out with a single hit again. The mouth though fully drains physical and gun attacks at first, so we can't damage it at all during the earlier parts of the battle. After several turns pass though, you get the option to pour paint over Madarame, which makes it weak to literally everything in the game. After that, a single shot is enough to take it out and transition into phase 2. In this phase, Madarame summons a couple of doppelgangers into battle. The way you're supposed to do this is to make use of the elemental weakness here and deal damage to Madarame via baton passes. Unfortunately, this is not an option here, so we just completely ignore the intended mechanic and focus on Madarame himself. Luckily the copies don't deal a lot of damage, and with the party guarding, we also prevent a lot of potential weakness hits and therefore won wars. This is also where the Crystal of Vanity and Morgana comes in handy. He can heal whenever needed without being afraid of getting hit by a weakness, since the accessory nullifies all weaknesses on the party member wearing it. Double shot is dealing decent damage to Madarame, and yeah, that's pretty much there is to that boss fight, and even though it took quite a while, Madarame went down eventually, and Palace number 2 is completed. Just a bit later, we already returned to Mementos. Even though we only have 2 open requests at this time, this is rather important. We need to craft a lot of stun guns and air cannons for the upcoming dungeon, And the easiest way to get materials is by driving around in mementos picking up items. This is also the reason why we put all our stamp points into increasing the items at Jose's shop. Ideally, we want 99 of each material to get as many items out of it as possible. Due to Ryuji's insta-kill ability, the majority of the enemies in here can be run over now, so that definitely saves quite a bit of time. Still, it took roughly 1.5 hours to do all of that, which had the nice side effect that the party now has a level of 22 to 23. Before leaving, we also itemized the region we got earlier for an accessory that lets Shoko start out with Tarokaja. This will come in very handy for random encounters, and the +3 strength is another nice bonus as well. During daytime, we mostly work on our confidence or increase Choka's social stats, while nights are usually reserved for crafting items. This is something that eventually Best Girl Kawakami will do for us once we get our confidence to a certain level, but for now, we still need to do it for ourselves. The only problem here compared to my first attempt at this challenge is that we don't have that much time to spend on getting our guts up, which means we most likely won't get access to ailment guns until after the next palace. We finally unlocked Best Girl Kawakami and also worked on the other confidence we unlocked so far, while continuing crafting infiltration tools during nighttime. By the way, I am going to craft way more stun guns than I need here. For whatever reason, I thought the upcoming boss has 3000 HP, so I'd need a total of 60 items, when actually he only has 1200 HP, so 24 items would have been enough already. Because of that, we wasted quite some more evenings than needed to, but luckily Persona 5 Royal is very lenient when it comes to optimizing your days, so it's not really a big issue. We also unlocked Kichioji into the first couple of things here. We sell off the unneeded unwashed armor and use the points to buy the Daten's belt, which has Automasu Kukaja on it. Extra buffs are always useful for random encounters. After that, we're off to get the darts tutorial. Unfortunately, it's not possible to max Ryuji's baton pass rank immediately, but at least we can already rank him up a little. The billiard part is going to be even more important in order to increase our technical rank, which is going to be quite a DPS boost throughout the entire game. But more on that later. Best Girl Makoto gets instructed to follow us. We meet Pancake-kun on the nicest day of the year and get confronted by Makoto just a few days afterwards. During the upcoming investigation, we meet Best Girl Chihaya as well as Oya. We will ignore both of them for the most part though, since their confident perks aren't really any useful in this challenge. If we get to the point where we have free time with nothing else to do, we will level them up a little bit, but they are pretty far down on the priority list. And with that, we are already off into the next palace. The first encounter against the Onis is rather annoying since they resist gun attacks, but again the combination of shock or sleep into a technical hit is doing rather good damage, so we get through the first fight without bigger issues. Makoto awakens to her persona, and we have to go through yet another fight with 2 Oni and a Fuki. Even though we can't hit a technical and forget status, it is still pretty useful in terms of managing the incoming damage. And yeah, that's pretty much everything there is to that fight. A few turns later, all enemies are down, and we leave the palace for now. Before we begin the infiltration, we go back to Kichioji to rank up our technical rank, playing billiard twice until we're at level 3. We also start the confident with Akechi, which, while technically not required for the royal ending, does have some additional cutscenes if you max him out. We also need to get Akechi to rank 4 to unlock the Jazz Club, so you might want to start that one as soon as possible anyways. Once again, we upgrade our guns at the airsoft shop, unfortunately still without ailments, and then head back into the palace. In this one, we also get our first tutorial on how to use showtime attacks. If you remember the rules, showtime attacks are allowed as long as the animation is focused on guns, and the first one with Morgana and An just so happens to perfectly fit into this theme. Generally, there are 4 possible showtimes that we are going to allow. The first one being Morgana and An, then we have Ryuji and Yusuke, Morgana and Haru, and Choka and Sumire. At this point, we only have access to one anyways, but this is something to keep in mind for later on. The first mini-boss we run into is a set of 4 Ouroboros, and I'm not even sure you can call them mini-boss, but the battle theme makes it seem like it is one, so I guess we can counter it. The fire attacks can do quite some damage, but otherwise it's not a big issue. Again, we work with technical gun damage, and the enemies are quickly disposed of. Also, for the first time, the strong shadow in this palace is also perfect to grind on. Taka Minekata is rather easily beatable since it is the first strong shadow in the game that is neutral to gun damage, so that is a nice upgrade already. The next mini-boss encounter is against a set of Fuki, Suiki and Kinki. The biggest issue here is definitely the Kinki, since that one actually nulls gun damage, meaning we either have to use items or try to get a showtime attack in. Luckily, Morgana gets wiped rather early in the fight. You may ask why that is lucky. Well, the chances to trigger a showtime attack are rather high when a party member gets wiped and revived afterwards, and that is exactly what happened here. Thanks to the sleep status on Kinki, we can also hit a technical with the showtime attack and one-shot it, so the most dangerous part is already out first. Taking care of the other two is not a big issue anymore, and the fight is won shortly after. The last part of the palace is rather annoying when it comes to random encounters. A lot of those either contain a Yaksini or a Rakshasa, both of which are immune to gun attacks, so more often than not, we have to run away from those encounters. The last mini-boss encounter is against the Companda. Even though this one resists gun damage again, it is not a big deal. With the help of Shock and Technical, we can actually deal rather good damage, and the boss is already down again a couple of turns later after a nice showtime attack. There is still one more thing that we have to do, and that is to get through the Will Seed Gatekeeper, which in this palace is a Cerberus. Cerberus does decent amounts of damage, but unlike our Habaki, he's actually not resisting gun damage, so that already makes it quite more manageable. Again, we use the combination of technical, Tom-Pass and guns to deal good damage. The boss does have Counter-Strike, but luckily it never triggered during Joker's attack, and just a few turns later the battle is already won and the last Will Seed retrieved. Again, this is a rather useful one at this point, since it gives the party member wearing it access to Marakukasha. Having an AoE defense buff at this point of the game is quite nice already, so we'll gladly take that. Technically we're done with the palace at this point, but there are still a few things I wanted to do here. Joker being level 26 was exactly where I wanted him to be, since we need that to conveniently fuse a Satanta with Rakukasha. This one is needed for rank 5 of the Twin Warden Confidant, and getting there early is extremely useful since it lets you fuse demons that are higher than Joker's level in exchange for money. Now, there might be some of you that probably already know where I'm going with this. Our plan here is to fuse a Ceph. Ceph is important for several reasons. One of them is that it has one-shot kill, which is the strongest single target gun skill in the entire game, and also learns Gun Amp, which boosts your gun attacks by 50%. By using Gallows later on, we can also get Gun Boost on it, which is another 25% damage for gun attacks, so that will be a huge DPS upgrade. And if this wasn't already good enough, itemizing Ceph during Fusion Alarm grants you an accessory that lets any party member use one-shot kill. So basically, by the end of the third palace, we will have access to the strongest single target gun attack in the entire game on potentially every party member. Sounds great, right? Yeah, there is a slight inconvenience with that. Fusing the demons needed for Ceph, and also fusing Ceph itself, costs a crap ton of money since almost every demon is quite a bit higher than Joker currently is. Grinding enemies casually for money will take forever, but luckily there is a way around that. In the first room of the palace, you can encounter a set of 3 high pixie which happen to be weak to gun attacks. Now the plan here is to defeat 2 of them, and then knock the third one down and repeatedly ask for money until they refuse to give anymore. This usually leads to them summoning another high pixie into battle, and you can rinse and repeat this procedure until all your party members are basically out of ammo. This way you can make up to between 150 and 200k yen per battle. While this may sound like a good chunk of money at this point of the game, you have to remember that we need to fuse several demons that are way above our current level, and oftentimes we have to make 2 or 3 fusions until we can even fuse the demon needed as ingredient for Ceph. Basically, we grind money here for roughly 2 hours until we have enough to fuse our Ceph. And I think overall the money spent to get there was probably somewhere around 1 million yen. Once we are done with the palace, we also get the tutorial for Fusion Alarm, and there are a couple of things we want to do here. First of all, we want to itemize our Shikiuchi from earlier, since it gives you a triple down skill card during Fusion Alarm, which we will teach to Seth. Triple down is the first of 2 AoE gun skills, and this will be a huge help going forward when it comes to clearing random encounters. In order to trigger a new Fusion Alarm, we need to fight a couple of battles, which is pretty convenient since I wanted to grind on Taka Minakata for some experience anyways. The second itemization, like mentioned earlier, comes from sacrificing our newly acquired Seth in order to get the special shot belt, which lets everybody use one-shot kill. Luckily, once Seth is in the compendium, resummoning it is much cheaper than the initial fusion, so we can easily do that until we have 3 belts in total, 1 for each party member. Most of the time, we will probably only use it on 2 party members since Makoto is used for utility more often than not, but it is nice to have a third one just in case. Back in the real world, we also finally managed to get Guts to rank 4, which means we can now start the Confident with a Y, the gunshop owner, and get those juicy perks as well. Before we do that though, we are back into the palace after sending the calling card to finish palace number 3. Unsurprisingly, the fight once again comes in 2 phases. In phase 1 we have to beat Kaneshiro's Piggytron. With Seth on our side and with pretty much everybody being able to use one-shot kill now, that's not a big issue though. The damage done to the boss is pretty high, and after 2 turns we already got him below half HP. March of the Piggy doesn't deal too much damage either, so we just completely ignore the mechanic with the item tossing and just continue to do damage until the boss is already down soon after. Phase 2 is where it gets interesting. For everybody that watched the video of my first attempt at this challenge, you might remember that this was the part where the challenge ended since Kaneshiro is immune to gun damage here and we didn't have any possibility to actually deal damage to him. This time, we have a way out though since gun items are allowed. An uses Lullaby to put everybody to sleep, and then we start tossing stun guns at the boss. Like mentioned earlier, he has 1200 HP, so we need a total of 24 items to beat the fight. I was hoping that we might be able to get a lucky showtime towards the end in order to finish the fight off, while conserving a few stun guns, but it didn't happen, so we just continued chugging items at the boss until he's down. In the end, I had crafted way more items than I needed due to me being too dumb to properly read the wiki, but it really was not a big issue at all. Eventually, we're going to need those excessive items anyways, so I guess it won't hurt to have them available now already. Anyways, Kaneshiro is down, palace number 3 is completed, and the run continues on. Back in the real world, we start Makoto's Confident as well as Iwai's. Iwai is obviously important for the gun perks, and Makoto will be part of our final team alongside Ryuji and Haru, so we want to get her up early as well. We also get Kawakami to rank 6, which means we can now have her make coffee and, more important, infiltration tools. Our proficiency is long maxed out already, so even though she can only make half as much items as Joker, it is still rather useful not having to waste any more evening slots at this point. By playing darts, we can also raise the baton pass rank of the other party members. If you make sure to leave less than 100 score on the board by round 4, the party member will finish the job if you give them the correct encouragement, which maxes out the baton pass rank within a single game, so that's another nice way to save a bit of time. Last but not least, we also start the Confident with Hifumi. She's not top priority, but the ability to eventually switch out party members mid-turn if things go south can be a nice safety anchor. After reading the last billiard book, we also max out our technical rank. Luckily, we already have proficiency maxed out for quite a while, and with Seth also having an extra plus 25 technical damage as a passive ability, we can pump out pretty big damage numbers now. Ryuji and Yusuke learned their Showtime attack, which is one of the few we can actually use, and this pretty much confirms the end for Morgana and onto the party. At this point, our party setup will be Ryuji, Yusuke, and Makoto. Yusuke will be replaced with Haru later on, but for now, he still does a good enough job. At this point of the game, the events around Futaba have pretty much transpired as well, so we are ready to head into the next palace for the first time and also witness my personal favorite cutscene in the entire game. Before fully diving into the palace though, we are off to the airsoft shop to upgrade our guns and finally get them customized. Ideally, we either want shock or freeze on our gun, since those are the elements we can hit a technical hit on. Freeze has the advantage that it completely bypasses any gun resistance or immunity, but will be gone again after one shot. This will be especially important for Joker later on. With shock, you can get 2 full turns with technical damage before the enemy recovers again, so from a pure DPS standpoint, shock probably is the better way to go here. We also head into Mementos one more time to stock up materials for the infiltration tools, as well as complete all requests we have gotten in the meantime. I'm not going to go into details of the requests because quite simply it's the same pretty much every time. Buff, inflict shock and wreck with technical hits. The majority of the requests are done to further advance some of the confidence, but that's about it mostly. With that out of the way, we're finally about to head into the next palace again. The first mini-boss encounter is a Garula here, and this one is an absolute joke. Shock, technical, and we're literally able to take it out within a single turn. The second mini-boss is a much bigger issue, and people who played Nocturne probably are getting slight PTSD flashbacks right now. It is our good old buddy Mods. Mod in Persona 5 wasn't a big issue for the most part, but in this setup it is quite a problem. Not only does it block gun damage, which means we have to resort to showtime attacks, it also transforms a character into a mouse for a few turns, and if that character happens to be either Ryuji or Yusuke, well, you're not able to trigger showtime attacks until the status is gone. The easiest way to trigger showtime is if a party member goes down and gets revived afterwards. Again, this only works if neither of them is turned into a mouse. All in all, quite a struggle with this one. Now combine that with me being super unprepared because I kinda forgot everything about this game. It actually results in the party getting wiped on the very first attempt due to Megiddo spam later on. Because of that, I made some slight changes to the party, replacing Makoto with An. An can put Mod to sleep, which not only makes the fight a ton more safer, it also gives us the chance to hit a technical on the showtime, maybe even one-shotting Mod in the process. And that is pretty much what happened a few turns later. After getting rid of one of the summons, we put Mod to sleep, trigger the showtime, and one-shot it from full HP. We have to do this fight again later on, so I'm pretty glad we found a viable strategy to get through here already. Mod number 2 already comes with a couple of summons from the start, which is actually a good thing since we can use those to hit a crit, and Baton Pass to increase the chance to trigger showtime. Unfortunately, we didn't get much luck with that, but it didn't really matter as we were able to trigger one just a few short turns later anyways to end the fight. The only battle left is the Gatekeeper of the Last Will Seat, which is an alley lad, and yeah, I should have checked the wiki beforehand, because it is actually the first one to be immune to gun damage by straight up repelling it. Technically, we could get through the fight using stun guns, but since this fight is not mandatory, and you can buy will seats that you missed in Jose's shop in Mementos anyways, I decided that it's not worth it and just continued on without it. And yeah, that's all there is for this palace. We return to the real world to prepare for the next boss fight. Also, I don't know why, but there is something funny having your teacher work on infiltration tools in the background while Joker is watching TV. Anyways, we hand the calling card to Futaba the following day and are back into the palace to head into literally the easiest boss fight in the entire game. Phase 1 of the battle is pretty much scripted, but I still tried to put out as much damage as possible because I was curious how far we can get her down already. The damage was good, but the phase was already over again before I finished setting up everything. Shortly afterwards, Futaba awakens to her persona and the actual part of the boss fight begins. Yusuke gets sent to the ballista, even though it's probably not even necessary, and we continue doing damage until she gets shot down. Once that happens, a couple of attacks are already enough to end the battle and complete Palace number 4. We go back to the real world to get Akechi to rank 4, which unlocks the Jazz Club. This one will be used very often in order to boost party member stats and also get some more skills on them. Futaba is especially important here since going there with her on Sundays makes her learn new skills to debuff the enemy, and this can come in very handy at times, so you definitely want to grab those. We also max our first confidence, including Ryuji, Yoshida and Takemi. In the Velvet Room, we fuse a White Rider and use it as gallows fodder for Seth. White Rider is the first persona to learn Gun Boost, which we want to transfer over to our main persona Seth. Eventually, Seth will also learn Gun Amp, which basically boosts our DPS by a whopping 75% in total, so that is real nice. It does take some save and reloading until we're actually able to inherit the correct skill, but that is definitely worth it. Futaba wakes up, takes care of Majed, falls right back asleep, eventually joins the party, and we all end up on the beach. Since we still have a lot of content left here though, we're not gonna waste much time here and jump forward in time a little bit. We start working on Futaba's Confidant and also unlock the request of the cheating gamer. The reason why I mentioned this one specifically is because it sets the flag to start the Confidant with Shinya, which will be one of the more important ones in this challenge. Because of that, we head into Mementos as soon as possible, which is pretty convenient since we also need to do a couple of requests to advance other Confidants anyways. We trigger the cutscene in the Ose fight, finish up everything else, and leave again as soon as we got all the stickers for Jose. Once that is done, we start Shinya's Confidant and we will try to max him out as quickly as possible. His final rank makes Shoka's gun bypass gun immunity, and this will be a pretty nice perk in terms of being able to take out gun immune enemies much easier later on. The plan is to eventually freeze gun immune enemies with Shoka's gun, and then use a gun attack to bypass the immunity due to freeze and take them out in a single hit. In the meantime, the party goes to Hawaii, and since Hifumi is literally the only girl available that we haven't rejected so far, we get to hang out with her in our free time. In the meantime, Principal Kobayakawa gets run over by a truck, Ryuji and Morgana both throw a temper tantrum, by far my least favorite part of the game by the way, and Morgana temporarily leaves the party to investigate on his own. Eventually, the party reunites after investigating Okumura's palace, and we're off into the next section of the game. Best girl Haru fully awakens her persona, and we have to fight a robot version of Haru's fiancé, though it's not really a big deal. We can take out the ads in a single triple down, and then just finish off the fiancé with a couple of more attacks. Haru is going to replace Yusuke in our active party now, though she is still rather weak at the moment. She's a couple of levels lower than the party, and only has access to triple down so far. Her attack stat is also quite a bit lower than Ryuji's or Yusuke's, but she's going to more than make up for that later on since she will also learn one-shot kill natively, as well as get access to gun boost and gun amp on higher levels. The early parts of the palace are pretty annoying in terms of random encounters. Almost every encounter has Arahaba key in it somewhere, so we either dodge the majority of shadows or just run away if we get into an encounter. The first section of the palace is trying to figure out which enemy has the card to advance further in. The way you're supposed to do that is by listening to the cues and then choose the correct enemy. We don't really do that though and just burn through everything. The encounters go down rather easily. At this point Choka is doing very high damage numbers with both triple down and one-shot kill, and will become even stronger once Seth learns gun amp. The second mini-boss, if you can even call it like that, is the fight against the robot army. Those all go down in a single triple down unless it misses, so there is some clearing up needed if that happens. Other than that, this is completed in just a few turns again. Before we are able to tackle the gatekeeper of the last will seat, we still have to go through the airlock puzzle area. I wouldn't really call myself dumb or anything, but it feels like I always struggle way more with this than I should. Anyways, the will seat gatekeeper in this one is Melchizedek, which luckily is neutral to gun damage, but does have high counter, so you need to watch out for that to at least some extent. Other than that though, he's no big deal and goes down to our guns relatively quickly, and that's already it for the palace. Haru and Morgana learned their Showtime attack, so now we have access to 3 out of the 4 Showtimes attack allowed in this challenge. At this point, they're not that important anymore, but it's always nice to have some options available. Anyways, we sent the calling card the following day, and are off to one of the boss fights I was probably most afraid of. I wasn't sure if this would go smoothly or completely terrible. The reason for that is, if you don't beat the current wave of robots fast enough, they will flee in panic and Okumura will just summon the same wave of robots again, effectively locking you into the face until you beat it in time. The only advantage here is that, unlike in vanilla, the robots in Royal don't have a gun resistance anymore, which makes putting out damage much easier. And well, it turns out my fear of this fight was pretty much for nothing, as we are breezing through each wave rather quickly. At this point, I stopped paying attention to the fight for the most part, since it was way easier than expected. And this actually came back to haunt me in the end. Last big boy executive director debuffed my party's defense and then charged up while I wasn't paying attention, and well, once he hit his Bing Bang Challenge special attack, he one-shot Choco from pretty much full HP. Turns out I have to pay some attention to this fight after all, I guess. During my second attempt, I paid closer attention to my party's debuffs and also made sure to always have an attack debuff on the director, and would you look at it, it's not even that bad if you prepare properly. Anyways, a few attacks later the director is down, we take down Robot Haru before she explodes, and a single attack to Okumura, and the fight is over in one. Back in the real world, we max out Makoto's Confident, as well as bring Futaba to the jazz club on Sundays. Like mentioned earlier, she doesn't actually learn the same skills as other party members, but gets debuff options as a support, so that is definitely nice to have. We also play a game of darts with Haru, since she's the only main party member that doesn't have a maxed out baton pass rank yet. Joker and Kasumi discover the third trimester's palace early, but other than her awakening, there isn't anything we can do here yet anyways. The encounter is disposed of quickly, and we are already on our way out again. Since we are starting to run out of things to do during free time, because not everybody we want to focus on is always available, we also put some more ranks into our backup party members such as An or Confidence, whose perks aren't as important like Soichiro. Something I didn't even notice at first is that we can't even max out Shinya at this point yet. Once you get his request, you have to return to Mementos. Unfortunately, the target is actually the next section, which doesn't unlock until after the deadline with Okumura runs out, so we still have to wait a bit longer on that one. We also get introduced to Haru's flower bed soon after. At this point, we can start growing vegetables on the school's rooftop.
Great vegetables.
The ones we're looking into more specifically are the Moonlight Carrot and the Earth Beans. The Moonlight Carrot fully restores an ally's SP, which will come in very handy later in the game, while the Earth Beans apply charge effect on the party member it's used. Speaking of Haru, her dad dies. More importantly, Futaba calls Mishima an NPC, and Mr. Pancakes himself tries to no-sell the spicy takoyaki before blackmailing the party into letting him join. With that, we are already into the next palace, although only for a very short amount of time. Literally the only battle we have to do here is against an Osei, which, although resisting guns, is really not a big issue at all. Before we dive deeper into the palace though, we return to Mementos, since we can now finally finish off Shinya's request. Ideally, Shinya's Confident will be maxed out by the last parts of Sai's palace, since the PS will come in very handy there. Before leaving Mementos, we fuse our Seth into a Yamato no Orochi, since that one can pretty much inherit all necessary skills, and also has great stats and elemental affinity coverage. Yamato no Orochi can also be itemized into a one-shot kill skill card during Fusion Alarm, so if we ever happen to not being able to carry it over during a fusion, due to lack of skill slots for example, we can always use that as a backup. We raise Shinya's Confident to rank 9, and then go back into the palace. The plan here was to do the first part of the palace, then max out Shinya, and then do the second part of the palace. This sounded like a pretty decent idea, which unfortunately didn't work out as intended, but more on that in a few. One thing I like to show off here is this incredible battle against the Valkyrie, where my one-shot kill got countered and Joker one-shot himself in the process. This just goes to show how powerful his gun skills have become at this point, where a simple counter can immediately result in a game over. Other than that, there isn't much worth mentioning here. There are barely any gun immunities in this palace, which is a nice start. The first mini-boss is against Nebiros. Luckily, we got a bullet hell to start off the battle, which already took about half of its HP off. Afterwards, it's just a couple more attacks, and we are already done again. The second mini-boss is a fight against Norn, which was probably even easier since its entire gimmick is to beat it within a single turn before it can use the Arahan, so no problem here. And that is basically all there is to it for the first visit. We visit Sire in the real world to get rid of the barrier, and here is where I made a slight mistake. Remember when I said I'd do part 1 of the palace, then make Shinya, and then do part 2? Well, once you finish part 1 of the palace, the cutscene happens on the next day, and the game automatically puts you back into the palace again. So much for my brilliant setup. I mean, it's not really a big issue or anything, but it's not as smooth as I first intended it to be. Anyways, we continue on in the palace and battle the gatekeeper of the last will seat a little early this time. Luckily, Bale is neutral to gun attacks, so after applying debuffs, we can get it down within a single turn. The next mini-boss waiting is Raja Naga, who is waiting at the end of the Dark Labyrinth. Unfortunately, this one does resist gun damage, but at this point this isn't really a big issue anymore. The high crit chance of one-shot kill, the baton passes and technical damage due to shock make quick work of it too, even more so when Futaba decided to charge up the entire party. The battle arena is a bit more interesting. The first encounter in the battle arena is a set of 2 Ganesha, which are taken care of quickly with triple down. The second battle is the reason why I wanted to max out Shinya before returning back to the palace, since it is a set of 3 Rangdas who all repel gun damage. The initial plan here was to use Choka's piercing ailment gun to apply freeze to all 3 of them and then take them out with a single triple down. Since that wasn't possible though, we went the more boring way by throwing stun guns. Luckily Rangda is weak to electricity and each one only has 200 HP. The incoming damage is not a big issue, though we do occasionally heal after throwing 3 stun guns in order to have more HP for the last battle. The last battle is against Thor and again is not a big deal either. A charged Megaton raid only does 40 damage to a guarding Joker, and thanks to Futaba's charge, we can take out Thor in one shot as well. And yeah, that is pretty much all there is to Sai's Palace. We leave, but still have to wait to send the calling card until right before the deadline. How totally not coincidental at all, just saying. Anyways, we use the remaining days to now max out Shinya, as well as battle Akechi to get him to rank 8, which is the final one you can reach by hanging out with him. The battle against Akechi really wasn't an issue either. Megidola is pretty much his only attack that does decent damage, but even that can easily be out-healed by chugging a couple of life stones. We also finally start our confidant with Haru. She's probably the most important party member in terms of damage, since she will learn both Gun Boost and Gun Amp later on. She will also be our waifu in this challenge. She was in the lead as voted by chat when I attempted this challenge for the first time, and even though Forehead Girl isn't necessarily my first choice, it's hard to deny that she is the perfect fit in a challenge run like this. We also read the Knowing Your Heart book, which you can get in Shimbocho once you've finished reading every other book that is available there. This lets us hit technical attacks with our guns on a confused enemy too. This is not going to happen all too often, but it might still come in handy every now and then. We also max out Futaba's confidant as well as Hifumi's. At this point, we are occasionally getting days where there is literally nothing to do that's relevant anymore. During nighttime, we usually use that time to go to the jazz club if that happens. During daytime, we start going to the gym in order to increase Choka's max HP and SP. It's not going to make that big of a difference, but if there is nothing else to do, might as well. Ideally you also want to use imported protein here, but those only restock every new month if I remember correctly. Normal protein does its job too though for the most part. We max out Maruki's confidant on his last day of school, and at this point we're pretty much ready to send the calling card and head into the next big boss fight. Phase 1 of the fight against Shadow Sai is pretty much scripted again. Sai does the roulette thing where she cheats to get the upper hand, we notice what's going on, catch her in the act, and this already triggers Phase 2. Phase 2 has her inheriting the element of the roulette. She will repel the chosen element while being neutral to the opposing one and resisting everything else. This is not a problem though, as gun attacks still do decent amounts of damage, even through the resistance. The damage that Sai does to the party can easily be out-healed with Makoto, and we slowly whittle our way until she dropped half of her HP. At this point, the next roulette pattern switches to Almighty, which makes her neutral to all elements, so now we can deal even more damage with our gun attacks. Once that happens, she's almost down already, and Yeah, this is pretty much everything there is to this battle. We finish Sai off, win the battle, and complete yet another palace. Admittedly, at this point, we're pretty much cruising through the game. There hasn't been a rather big obstacle in a while now, with our options expanding as the game continues on. Anyways, we go through all the cutscenes, the story comes full circle to this point, and we continue on shortly afterwards. And because things escalate rather quickly towards the end of the game, it's only a little while until we are right off into the next palace to take down Shido. Compared to previous palaces, there are a lot of mini-bosses here, so we'll get started right away. The first mini-boss here is Battle of the Snakes, as Choka's Yamata no Orochi battles its copycat to start off. The enemy likes to use Concentrate and also buff its attacks, so that is something to watch out for. Luckily for us though, it never even gets to attack, as we already take it out before it can do anything significant. Also, there is a lot of maneuvering around in here with the mouse mechanics. I know a lot of people really hate this part of the game, but even though it's not my personal favorite either, I didn't find it to be that bad for the most part. The puzzles aren't really that difficult, and it's a nice mix up of things compared to other palaces before. Anyways, mini-boss number 2 is Forneus. Considering how Forneus is usually a lower level persona, I'm actually rather happy it's more of an endgame thing here. Unfortunately for Forneus, that doesn't change the fact that we have absolutely zero problems taking it out. Just a couple of one-shot kills and the battle is already over again. Before advancing further, we use the fusion alarm to fuse ourselves a trumpeter. This one is the first persona to learn Debilitate at level 65, so unfortunately we're just one level off here. Luckily, we also put Growth 2 on it for passive experience, so eventually the level up is going to happen anyways. Mini-boss number 3 is a Hanuman accompanied by 2 Garulas. The Garulas like to rage themselves, which makes it even easier to take them out as they take double damage during rage, and Hanuman is not a big issue either and goes down shortly afterwards as well. Bonus points for finishing this fight with a nice little showtime. After completing this battle, Ryuji also learns Charge, so we got even more nice buffs available now. Before going for mini-boss number 4, I wanted to check out the Gatekeeper for the Will Seed, and I should have probably checked this one on the wiki again before charging in. It's a battle against Yutakini and Akali, all 3 of which null guns. Now, technically I could have tried landing a freeze with Joker on all 3, or just finish the fight with items, but considering the accessory get here isn't that useful for the boss fight, I decided to get out and get it in Mementos later on since it wasn't really worth the hassle. Because of that, we continue on like before and charge into the IT President's room for mini-boss number 4, an Oberon accompanied by 2 Titanias. Again, the battle really doesn't pose much of a threat. The Titanias can be taken out within a single turn, which causes Oberon to just summon new ones, therefore not even getting a single hit in before all the enemies are down. The last mini-boss approaching is an Ongyo Key, and just like before, there aren't any problems here. Guns deal pretty decent damage, and a few attacks later, the battle is already over again. With that, we get all 5 letters of introduction, so we are ready to tackle Shido now. Or we would be, but oh hey Akechi, good to see you back again. Want a battle? Sure thing. At the start of phase 1, you need to go through Akechi's ads first. Since those go berserk and therefore reduce their defense, that is not a big issue. Even though the enemies deal quite some damage due to the berserk, it's not really a problem for the most part. First phase Akechi is not really a big deal either. Even his Mega Down barely does any damage to the party. As always, buff and debuff and go to work until he's down. In phase 2, we fight Loki Akechi. The strategy remains mostly the same. Akechi will occasionally use Tetrakarn to reflect physical damage, but we can just break that with a single bullet shot from one of the party members' guns. Charged one-shot kills deal big amounts of damage, and we can reduce Akechi's HP to below half within a single turn already. Another round of charging, followed up by more one-shot kills, is all it takes, and Akechi is down and out. Akechi goes down, and that's about everything for this palace. We return to the real world and prepare the calling card, or more like the calling video in this case, the day after. Back in the palace, we confront Shido and the next big boss battle takes place. Again, this is a fight that comes in several phases. Remember back when we fought Kaneshiro and I said I accidentally crafted way more stun guns than needed and that we're eventually gonna need them anyways? Well, this is exactly where we are going to need them. Phase 1 Shido has a total of 10,000 HP and switches forms every time you deplete a third of his health. Well, it just so happens that his first form is completely immune to all physical and gun damage. So the plan here was to do as much damage with Choker's piercing gun as possible and then throw stun guns until we reach the HP threshold for him to transform. And that's pretty much all there is to this first form. Keep buffing and debuffing to reduce the amount of incoming damage and throw stun guns. Shido also likes to Dekunda himself or Dekage the party, which can be annoying at times, but it's not really a big issue. Once Shido transforms to the second form, the fight becomes much less annoying already, since we can now go back to doing regular gun damage unlike before. One turn of charged attacks is already enough to trigger the last transformation and push him into the last bits of phase 1. In his last form, Shido is resisting gun attacks again, but even that is not a problem since we charge up everybody again and finish off the first phase with warm one-shot kills. Shido transforms again and phase 2 of the battle begins. Strategy is still pretty much the same as before though. Buff, debuff, charge up, and go to work. Shido likes to inflict fear on party members with his attacks, but the ailments are usually auto-cured by a party member just a short while later. Charged one-shot kills once again do good damage, and once Shido's HP is almost at 0, we are heading into the last fight of the phase. This time for real. Shido transforms yet again, but the strategy still remains the same as before, considering his affinities don't change at this point anymore. Again, buff and debuff, charge up party members, and go to work. Even a charged up heatwave on Shido's part doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. And once Shido's HP drop below 25%, he will eject everybody but Choker out of the fight, making this a classic one-on-one for the last bits. Unfortunately for him, this part is not a big deal either. Shido tries to attack with all sorts of stuff, but the incoming damage for the most part really isn't bad at all, and after 2 more one-shot kills, the battle is finally over and won for good. Back in the real world, we continue working on Haru's Confidant, as it's pretty much the only thing left to do at this point, and also get around to start romancing her before ultimately maxing her out as well. We also go down mementos again in order to clear the last couple of requests and collect the last few stamps as well. Yamata no Orochi served us well up until here, but we will fuse it into Raphael now. Raphael doesn't have that many advantages over it, but it is a higher level, has better stats, and we're also able to finally get Endure on our main persona as a safety anchor. One thing I wanted to do before leaving Mementos is fight a very special enemy, and you can probably already tell by the video what I'm referring to. I wanted to give the Reaper a shot to see if I can already beat him at this point. The Reaper doesn't have any gun resistances, and we are very good on buffs and debuffs, so I thought we might have a realistic chance at winning here. Also, one thing some of you may not know, if you fight the Reaper, you always want him to ambush you. If you initiate the battle, the Reaper gets 2 actions every turn. If you get ambushed though, he only gets 1 action per turn, making the battle much easier. I don't know why that is, but it's just something to keep in mind. Anyways, we get ambushed, throw out debuffs and buffs, and go to work. And to be honest, the damage wasn't even as bad as I first thought it would be. Damage by the party, while not super high, wasn't too shabby either, and incoming damage for the most part also was manageable. To be fair, him only having 1 action per turn definitely make things easier. The Reaper oftentimes also completely wastes his turn by casting elemental breaks instead of trying to pump out damage. Occasionally, he will also try to hit party members with their weakness in order to get a 1 more, but due to everybody having their evade passives at this point, they do manage to dodge those attacks rather often. Towards the end of the battle, the Reaper gets desperate and tries to use insta-kill attacks to get rid of the party that way. Luckily, we have several safety nets for a scenario like this. First of all, everybody at this point has Endure, so they would survive at 1 HP. Then we also have Futaba's ultimate defense, which would block one of those attacks, and if all those fail, we still have several homunculus in the inventory to save the party if needed. Eventually, the Reaper is down and the fight is won. As a reward, we get a total of 4 levels going from 76 to 80 and also get a Divine Pillar in the process. While it is a nice accessory, it probably won't see much usage unless things might get really tricky. Back in the real world, we take Haru to the jazz club on December the 11th in order to learn Debilitate on her. Having 2 party members with access to Debilitate might make some of the last fights much more manageable, so it's definitely a good idea to grab it. A few days later, Shida confesses everything, but it doesn't seem to be working, so on Christmas Eve the party is going to change everybody's heart by going to the core of Mementos. Luckily, we were always up to date with our Mementos trips, so we can easily just go down all the way and enter the dungeon. The only mini-boss in here is a set of 2 thrones. Similar to Madarame's place, they changed it here since in vanilla it was an Abaddon, which would have been bad since that one absorbs guns. The thrones, however, are no problem and we take them out quickly. And yeah, that's actually all there is to it for the deep parts of Mementos. We make it all the way down to the bottom and enter the scripted boss battle against the Holy Grail. Again, there isn't really nothing to do here. Just do some damage, let it get healed a couple of times, and then you're automatically thrown out of the fight and Mementos as a whole. The real world merges with Mementos, the party disappears, and Igor gets identified as the bad guy after all. Since we're not comfortable trusting a floating old man, we reject his offer, collect our party members, and are back into the merged world to take care of problems once again. There are a couple of mini boss fights coming up here now, but none of them are any dangerous really, so let's start with the first one, Uriel, who is accompanied by 2 angels. We charge up, hit a single triple down, and win the fight. Very spectacular, I know. Next up is Raphael, which coincidentally is the persona we're using at the moment as well. Let's see which version is stronger. Charge up, one-shot kill number 1, one-shot kill number 2, and Makoto can actually finish off with her regular gun. Guess my Raphael wins. The third one is Gabriel. Guess what we're going to do? Correct. Charge, one-shot kill, win. Easy. Last but not least, we got Michael. Michael is actually a bit bulkier, but he made one fatal mistake, which is summoning angels. You know what that means? Charge, critical hit, baton pass, one-shot kill, and boom, there goes Michael. It is pretty ridiculous how powerful the party is at this point and how much we're cruising through the game. Then again, the last time I stopped paying attention, the party actually got wiped, so some focus is still very much advised. We return for the rematch against the Holy Grail, this time with a better strategy in hand. While Ryuichi gets ready to cut the cables, the rest of the party already prepares for the big shots. I also like how 2 charged up hits already depleted its HP by like 2/3 before the cables are even cut off. The Holy Grail starts charging up, but too little too late, and one more hit already seals the deal. Now we head into the actual boss fight against Yaldabaoth. This one has all kinds of tricks up his sleeve, but let's see if this god can withstand the sheer brutality that is our gun setup. Strategy is mostly the same again. Buff, debuff, charge, and do big damage. In the beginning he mostly uses Arrow of Light, which, even if it hits, usually doesn't do too much damage. Once we start getting rid of his HP, he starts summoning some of his arms, which can do a variety of status elements, and this is probably the most annoying part of the battle. This isn't really a game breaker or anything, but having different status elements, some of which you can't even heal properly, can be quite annoying. We also use triple down in order to keep the arms down for the most part. Funnily enough, the sword part is the only one that actually repels gun damage. Even though one would think the gun part doesn't take any damage from the guns, like the wiki also says, it seems to take neutral damage, it goes down just as easily. Once you get Yaldabaoth into low HP, he starts reviving all body parts and charges up for a big attack. Unfortunately for him though, he never even gets that far since we end the battle before that happens already. And of course, what better way to end the vanilla part of the challenge than with a big bullet from the world's largest gun right through the head of a god. Akechi takes the hit for Joker, and we spend Christmas Eve with our favorite forehead. The new year hits, and everybody meets up again, though some things seem to be a little off, including this. Not gonna lie, when I played Royal for the first time, I was confused as hell at this point of the game. Anyways, we meet up with Akechi, discuss the happenings, and meet up with Kazumi at Odaiba, where a new palace is up in the real world. Unfortunately, I never unequipped the one-shot kill accessory from Yusuke, so even though Akechi can use Riot Gun, we don't nearly have as much firepower as we did before. Still, it is enough to go through the first parts of the palace. The encounters really aren't an issue at that point yet, and we learn of Sumira's past, and Maruki takes her with him. After watching all our party members' new reality, we return to the palace a week later to tell Maruki to F off and have to fight Sumire to get her head straight again. Luckily, again, no big issue, and because this is only half the fun, we also have to battle Sandrilon now. Shortly afterwards, the rest of the party also returns to rejoin again, which drastically increases our firepower, and we start the battle all over again. Turn 1, we switch out Akechi for Makoto, and Morgana for Haru, since they don't really add anything to the battle anyways. With our actual setup, we can go back and do the same thing we'd always do. Buff, debuff, charge, and go to work. Luckily we hit a couple of crits, so we can also work with baton passes and take care of Sandrilon quickly. A few days later we return to the palace to tackle the first part. Sumira's persona awakens again, but won't see any use as we immediately switch her out in order to restore our proper party setup. The first mini-boss here is a battle against the Chimera and Dionysus, both of which go down to our gunpowder within a single turn, so no big deal here. The second mini-boss is a pair of Scathatch and Chujulane. The pronunciation of this one is still god-awful and probably super wrong, but whatever. Anyways, while the Scathatch doesn't have any gun resistance, it does have counter, so that can be a problem occasionally. Other than that, it's the same as always. Buff, debuff, charge, and go to work. Chujulane is using our strategies against us by hitting crits left and right with one-shot kill, though luckily we were never really in danger of party members being wiped or anything. Once Scathatch is down, we focus on the last remaining shadow and take it out shortly afterwards too. And that's already it for part 1 of Maruki's Palace. In order to advance further, we need to cut off the cables that seem to come up from the depths of Mementos. Before going there though, we get the third awakenings for our party. Not only does this give them several new elemental resistances, some of them get really useful skills like Makoto's AoE Debilitate, Futaba's Ultimate Support, or Ryuji's AoE Charge. Once we awaken everybody, we go back into Mementos to explore the new area. Luckily at this point the party's level is so high that we can basically auto-kill every shadow that is lurking around here. We also use a Metatron for 2 different reasons. One is that you can itemize it into a really strong gun for Joker that also adds +6 to all stats. The second one being that it is an ingredient for Lucifer. Lucifer will be our final persona in this playthrough. Not necessarily for the skills, but because of his great elemental affinities. Luckily, we can also pretty much carry over all important skills during fusion, which is nice. Having to ditch Strain Physical did hurt quite a bit, but there are only so many skill slots available, and other things just are more important unfortunately. Once we collect all the stamps, we could theoretically go back into the palace, but there is one more thing I want to try here. On the top floor, there is an optional boss fight against Jose, and seeing as I had very little trouble with the Reaper, I thought this one might go similarly. Strategy for Jose is pretty much the same as in every other fight as well. Buff and debuff, charge, and go to work on him. His attacks during earlier phases don't really do a lot of damage, so there is nothing to worry about for the most part. Similar to the Reaper, he tries to hit weakness hits on the party in order to get one more, so the evade on everybody definitely is very useful. Damage output is rather strong here, and we get Jose down decently fast. During later parts of the battle, he likes to charge up his fireworks attack. Guarding can be useful here, but the party can take an unprotected hit as well, as long as the buffs and debuffs are up properly. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that battle as well. Continue on like this, and Jose is down and out soon. This also put pretty much everybody on level 99. We were already close on maxing out anyway, so it was a nice touch that this fight got the job done. With that out of the way, we return to the palace to finish the infiltration. The first mini-boss in the way is Surt. Luckily Surt is neutral to gun attacks, so at this point you know the theme. Set up, go to work, win the fight. The gatekeeper for the will seed is a Fafnir, which unfortunately repels gun damage. Luckily for us, it is not immune to freeze, so we use Choker's piercing ailment gun and then one-shot it with a technical deterrent after. The last mini-boss of the game is Siegfried. Luckily this version is only resistant to guns, so we can use our regular strategy like always. Buff, debuff, charge, and shoot until dead. And that is actually all for this game. We hand the calling card to Maruki and are about to head into the final fight of this challenge. Unsurprisingly, the final boss battle against Maruki comes in several phases again. In phase 1, Maruki and Azathoth are accompanied by 3 tentacles. All damage to Maruki is severely reduced, so the plan here is to target Azathoth, as only one of them needs to be defeated. Again, we start buffing and debuffing and setting up our charges. Ideally you want to take out the tentacles first, since the amount of tentacles directly influences the amount of damage you can do to the boss. 2 out of 3 tentacles can be taken out with guns. The third one unfortunately repels them, so the plan here is to take out 2 tentacles with triple down and then inflict damage directly onto Azathoth. This strategy actually works out pretty well, and we're able to deal quite some damage to Azathoth. Once its HP drops below 25%, Maruki switches into phase 2 where he resummons all tentacles again and also doubles Azathoth's HP from roughly 6,000 to 12,000. And this is where things get somewhat tricky. Again, we take out 2 out of the 3 tentacles and try to get as much damage on Azathoth as possible. Unlike in phase 1 though, the affinities of the tentacles that are revived by Maruki can change. I'm not 100% sure if this follows a fixed pattern, but once the tentacles are revived, we now have a second one that straight up repels guns. This means that not only are we able to only kill 1 tentacle at this point anymore, but because of that, it will also be much harder to deal good amounts of damage to Azathoth. At this point, I was really afraid of him spawning the 3rd tentacle with those same affinities as well, since we effectively cannot kill those. Their only weakness is physical attacks, and they null everything else, including elements, so even stun guns or air cannons are useless here. Luckily, it looked like the 3rd tentacle followed a specific cycle of affinities, where at first it's weak to guns, after being resummoned once, it is neutral to guns, and the 3rd time, even though it repels guns, it is weak to all other elements, meaning we can take it down with stun guns and air cannons, though this variation obviously takes longest, considering we can only deal 50 damage per shot, and every tentacle has 650 HP, meaning we need 13 items to take out a single tentacle. Once that cycle is over, it once again starts from the beginning with a gun weak one. I am not entirely sure if that is some kind of safety mechanism in this fight or anything, but if that wasn't the case, we'd literally be stuck on the final boss of the game. So again, the plan is to take out 1 tentacle and then try to get as much damage on Azathoth as possible. Luckily, Maruki's attacks for the most part are not that dangerous. He can inflict all sorts of ailments to the party, but only very rarely follows them up with something that could hit a technical on the ailment. Haru's passive ability also greatly reduces the chance of getting inflicted with an ailment, so that is definitely very important as well. So yeah, like mentioned before, the only thing we can do now is getting rid of that 1 tentacle and then try to deal as much damage to Azathoth as possible before the new one gets summoned, and believe me when I say that this battle took forever. Another thing to keep in mind here is that if the battle lasts more than 40 turns, Azathoth will start spamming Make It Loud and deal huge damage to the party, effectively wiping them a few turns later once that happens. I'm not going to show you everything here because that would take way too long, and the pattern is pretty much the same all the time, so we skip forward to the final parts of the battle. Just know that this phase alone took me 31 turns and roughly 35 minutes real time to get through. Once Azathoth is defeated, a single hit to Maruki is enough to end this phase and this part of the battle for good. But of course this wouldn't be a final battle if we were already done here. Azathoth evolves into Adam Cadmon and we have to fight Maruki one more time. Luckily in this phase he only has 3000 HP, though all damage inflicted to him is greatly reduced. The strategy here now is much more manageable than in the previous battle though, since we only have 1 target And he also takes neutral damage to guns now. Maruki's attacks again for the most part are not that bad, and we still deal good amounts of damage even though it's already reduced quite a bit. He will once use Revitalized Soul to heal himself for 1200 HP, but at this point there isn't much he can do anymore. Another round of one-shot kills is enough to get Maruki down and push him into the last phase of the final battle, and at this point the challenge is basically won. Phase 4 is a scripted battle where you cannot lose. We have to go through the scripted attack position from Adam Catman twice until the trigger for the final shot happens. And of course, just like we did with Yaldabaoth earlier, in the spirit of the run, we end the final battle with a beautiful gunshot through Adam Catman right on the forehead of Maruki. We watch the last couple of cutscenes, and before finally leaving the palace for good, we have a good old fist fight, because when your guns are gone, might as well use your bare hands. And that is it for this challenge run, everybody. This is probably the longest challenge I have done up to this point, clocking it at 83 hours of in-game time at the end. I was really happy that I got to finish this one after the first attempt last year failed so early on. I haven't completed Royal since I first beat it casually back when it was released, so it was nice to get through the entire game again. I hope all of you enjoyed the run just as much. If you did, feel free to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and also check out my Patreon page that I set up just a while ago. Subscribing on Patreon gives you 48-hour early access to all my challenge runs, among other perks. That is it for me this time. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see all of you next time as well. Take care.